Kind of sounds like it might be a good idea and a good plan. Chat about those things today.
Heck yeah.
Awesome. As we adjust to some of our levels here, bear with us, right?
Yeah.
Producer Max still out for the count.
Second surgery, so
Second surgery.
sucks.
Man, mountain biking on a electric bike, popping wheelies,
And
right?
then the tire came off.
Oh man, I watch a lot of YouTube videos and stuff of like mountain bike crashes and stuff, and
Hmm.
oh man, now it gives that little extra bit of like stomach cringe when you see it because
Yeah.
you see the aftermath of it, right?
Yeah. We're at over a month and it'll be
Yeah, yeah.
longer.
So
Yeah.
speedy recovery to you, Max. Let's see. Our camera's a little bit off, but that's okay, right? See, this is why we need a man. This is it.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, let's go ahead and get started. Hey, everybody, welcome to Overtime with Coach Blue and Athletic Director Marissa.
Hello.
This is our weekly show where we jump on here and talk about all things addiction recovery, mental health, trauma, sports, recreation. We sum it all up right here on Overtime. Seems like we're always running on overtime, though. You noticed?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Something
absolutely.
on the fumes.
But we love it. This is where we can field questions. This is where we can dive into some deeper content and share with you some of our own experiences and our own thoughts. Coach Blue here, licensed mental health counselor and addiction counselor. What are you?
I am a certified recreational therapist.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, together I think we make a pretty dang good team and might be able to help get you out of the weeds if you're feeling stuck. But before we jump into all that, we got to give thanks and shout outs to our Patreon subscribers. You guys are what makes this podcast move. You get it out there to the ears that truly need it and to the hearts of those who are seeking some extra benefit from recovery, maybe from that starting line they're going to about ready to jump into. Without your help, we wouldn't be able to do this. So would you mind sharing with the listeners all of our champions and all those who make this whole shindig possible? It's a cool thing where you contribute to the podcast and get some cool stuff in return.
Yes. We want to thank all of our Patreon subscribers. We will start with thanking our super fans Karen Hardy, Steve Riggs, Jerem Thurston, Tara Butson, Holly Davies, Scott Foster, Chris Williams, Sensei KP Brown, Patrick Forsyth, Brock Ellerman, and Christy Case. Thank you, our super fans. Then our rookies, we want to thank Sherry Polson, Earl Dyer, Wendell Wood, Brad Waldron, Ron and Dee Loesch, and Sione and Mary Inuk. Thank you, rookies. Pro level, Justin Robbins, and our champions, Shad and Freya Robinson and Andrew Baird. Thank you guys so much. We couldn't do this podcast without you, and we're able to keep it going because of you. So thank you again.
Absolutely. If you want to jump on and check out what you can benefit from by jumping on and getting some of our bonus content, our exclusive, I guess, what drops. Is that what they say
Yeah.
nowadays? Yeah.
Yeah.
Jump on patreon.com/addicttoathlete and pick a tier that's going to work best for you. $2 a month gets you all the bonus content, right?
Yeah.
Anything above that gets you some glamorous prizes and merchandise and some cool perks. So
Yep.
jump on there. I'll be soon releasing a daily video to kind of go along with that playbook. And like I said, you guys get to be the first ones that see it. And so it's going to be super beneficial, for recovery, for mental health, for trauma, things like that. And so jump on patreon.com/addicttoathlete.
And you can go back and listen to all the past episodes. We have probably over 100. So you just pay up and you get
Yeah.
all the bonus from the past, not just moving forward. So
$2 a month.
Yep.
Right. Pay ahead. And it's,
yeah, it's like $16 for the year.
$16. Go figure.
Yep.
Nonetheless, thank you guys so much. Hey, so while we're on the subject of checking out the interwebs, jump on addicttoathlete.org and register you and your family for the upcoming September 9th proxy run.
Absolutely. We have our proxy run happening in Spanish Fork, Utah, this coming September 9th. We also have a virtual option if you are outside of the state or unwilling to do it or unable to do it that day. It's only $10 to register, $15 if we need to ship you your bib, and an additional $15 if you want a race shirt. But this is a great experience to have. We have a whole memory grove section that we have pictures and things of those who have passed on from addiction or mental health issues. If you have a picture you'd like to submit, please email Liz at addicttoathlete.org and she will make sure to get that person in the Memory Grove section. And it's also a really easy, a 5K is only 3.1 miles. It can be
Only.
walked. Yeah, bring your dog, bring your kids and a scooter. Like, have this become like a really good family friendly event that you guys can come to every year.
Absolutely. And I've seen it happen where families can come together and beyond the traditional Memorial Days and whatnot, but really pay tribute to them and the lives that they led. And so it doesn't matter if you've lost a loved one or a friend, even if you have someone out there that's struggling, come show your support by jumping on, registering, and getting involved.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful experience. You're going to build lots of relationships, and it's a healing process. So
Yep.
addictoathlete.org underneath our events tab, correct?
Events and races.
Okay.
Yeah.
Get it on. Anyway, so that's going to be a great thing. Marissa, we're coming off the heels of some pretty interesting experiences, man. Back to back events. We had the Saint to Sinners bike race,
Yeah.
which was Salt Lake to Las Vegas. And then we turned around and went down to the Beaver Canyon half marathon with
Yeah.
our coaches down there in beautiful Beaver County.
Yeah.
Gorgeous run down there. And so we've been busy, but it's been awesome because we've been able to talk to a lot of different people about addiction recovery, about what we do, and kind of advocate for, I'm going to call you the underdogs, right? The ones that don't get that voice all the time. And I just want to give a special shout out and thanks to all of our athletes. We've had so many experiences this year where they've been asked to volunteer, they've
Yeah.
asked to serve their communities. We had Steve Riggs, who was out there, I think by himself, running a whole aid station for the Kachina
I,
Mosa.
I think you said Tyson
Oh,
might have
good.
been with him. But
Nice. Yeah. So the two
yeah,
of them out there.
Kachina Mosa is a tough
It's a
race.
brutal race, and even more, I guess, exhausting to hike to these aid stations, get all that stuff up there so the runners can succeed. But all you athletes, I want to thank you all for sharing your time. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of the most precious things we have, and the premise of Addict to Athlete was to give back to the communities that we once took from,
Yeah.
and I think that's a thing that we don't want to lose. And so you might notice that when race directors or events and people need service, they call us. They call us first.
Yeah, we've got some amazing
Yeah.
people that are willing to give quite a bit. So if you are interested in serving, we have lots of stuff for you to help with. Let us know. And whether that's helping with our organization or helping with other races and events that we get asked to help with.
100%. So thank you all athletes and friends and family of the program. We totally appreciate it. Lots of questions, lots of stuff coming in today. There's probably 5 or 6 different paths we could take. But I want to first kind of jump into the situations that seems to plague a lot of folks in recovery, specifically early recovery, and that is dealing with the unresolved grief, the unresolved turmoil, or even the trauma that's kind of been left out there in the wake. It's part of the collateral damage that addiction, kind of rains down upon us. And I really wonder if we are prepared for what this is going to take. Most of the times when someone gets an experience with any kind of forms of trauma or grief, if they're grief stricken, they lose someone, they have a hard time wrapping their head around how to do it sober, how to do it without suffocating the feelings that need to exist in order to have the healing process occur. And I think sometimes we kind of get stuck in the grief cycle, which is important and big.
Yeah.
But the grief cycle doesn't explain it all either. And the grief cycle, I think, has some definite components to look at, but it doesn't always fall in a cycle like that either. I mean, it kind of bounces around and whatnot. I think it's good to know what it is.
Mhm.
Do you even know what the grief cycle is?
I have. I probably can't just pull it out right
Yeah.
now, but I
So
know that there's 5 stages
there are
of
5
grief.
stages. Yeah. And all these stages are trying to lead you to acceptance.
Yeah.
And that can't come before you cross paths with the other cycles, right? So you've got, I think, like denial,
Yeah.
because when that first happens, you kind of have this impression of like,
It's
is
not
this real? This
Yeah.
can't be real.
Yeah.
My loved one just left this morning, or I talked to them, 2 days ago on the phone.
Mhm.
And the reality of it doesn't quite sink in because we don't realize how fragile some of this stuff is.
Yeah.
Right. And then I think is it anger comes next, where it's like,
Yeah.
the frustration, and you start looking for maybe things to blame or
Yeah.
upset at the person,
'Cause this can't
um,
really be happening after
upset at the
that.
situation.
Yeah.
And then I think it's bargaining, right?
Yeah.
And bargaining is kind of an interesting, I think, part of the cycle. What do you think that looks like, the bargaining chip of?
it should have been me, or it could have been somebody else, and why was it them? And if, you know, can you please, if I did this, this wouldn't have happened. If I did
Hmm.
that, it's part in some of that blaming, I
Lots
think,
of
as
people
well.
get stuck in that, not realizing the magnitude of what it is.
Yeah.
And then the follow-up, which most people kind of pitch tents and camp in, which is the depression, that
Hmm.
feeling of loss, that void, that longing for the past, that's messing up your today and future.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
The
the
acceptance.
acceptance.
But I think with stages of grief, when people think about that, they think this is where you have to move in this path, but it doesn't do that. You can go immediately anger first and bargaining, then denial, then depression. And then you could even come to this acceptance area, and then all of a sudden something triggers you and you're back to anger and
Hmm.
denial. Like, if this isn't a linear kind of scenario, and that's okay. Like, don't think that that's the way it is supposed to run or should run,
Yeah.
because it doesn't.
And I'm glad you said that because, if you think, okay, I've closed the door on bargaining, crap, here comes depression, right?
Mhm.
It never works that way. Does it? It's
No.
always kind of this bouncing around of and I think some people even probably feel like they can accept it and
Mhm.
then slip back into the depression.
Yeah.
Does that
Oh,
make
yeah.
sense?
Oh,
So
yeah. Thinking you're getting to a certain place and that it's understandable, and then, yeah, something else comes up and you're like, "No, this isn't right."
exactly. So that's the thing, right? Even if you accept it, you're still probably going to bounce into some of these kind of things, and it could take a long time. Uh, the funny thing about this, that I've really like listened to a lot of folks who experience some severe loss. Um, they have people that approach them have a hard time guessing how to interact with them. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? And a lot of times they avoid the topic because they're afraid of reopening wounds
Yeah.
that may have
Not
healed.
wanting to hurt them more
Hmm.
or cause them more grief, or, to cry is, so we just avoid it and pretend
And what's the
that
result
everything's
of that,
fine.
though, Marissa?
Well, I think a lot of people are hurt by that even more so, because their life and their reality is totally shifted and changed and broken, and for you to pretend that nothing's wrong because you feel uncomfortable is is kind of a slap in the face, I think, sometimes.
I think so too. And more often than not, these folks want to talk about it too.
Mhm.
But we, on the other hand, who may not have experienced it or felt that same degree, we may not know how to respond. So where does it begin then, right? Because we all have these things in our life. They're called trauma thresholds, and these are the things that, if we were to experience, would probably make us question our recovery, our sobriety,
Yeah.
our sanity. And when someone has or experiences a trauma threshold that we have, say like losing a child or something, we really get nervous because that's too close to home. And even talking about it, I mean, for crying out loud, Marissa and I were talking about like life insurances and burial plots. And I'm thinking, God, you were in our 40s. Like, we don't need to be thinking about that right now.
Yeah.
And it seems like, what if we jinx the universe, and because we're talking about it's going to happen? We've got to be okay with talking about these kind of things with our
Mhm.
friends and families because it can't be a taboo topic.
Yeah.
Even so, when you're coming talking to somebody that's experienced their trauma threshold that you yourself may have, that they've experienced that might be the same, it's important for you to gain knowledge from them because
Yeah.
they're experiencing it in real time, and the likelihood of you having that, although maybe small, is possible. So
Yeah.
how do we approach that then? How do we approach someone who's grieving, and what do we do? Because I think a lot of us feel kind of helpless, right? We feel kind of like,
Yeah.
what can I possibly say? And obviously, it's not well, they're in a better place. I mean, we know that's not right to say those kind
No.
of dumb things,
I
right?
think some of it's just acknowledging the situation. "Hey, I heard this." And then, "I'm sorry that this happened." And being able to say, you know, "I want you to know that you can lean on me or talk to me whenever you're struggling, or just know that we love you." But I also know there's situations where it's just, a lot of people always say, "Let me know what I can do to help." And most of the time, people who are in a grieving situation, they have no idea.
Yeah.
Like, they don't even know how to function themselves, let alone start assigning tasks and saying, "Oh, could you bring me dinner? Oh, could you," and if it's somebody that you know really well, just go do something for them.
Yeah.
Buy them a gift card for food. One thing that I know somebody did for us when my mom passed away is they just dropped off a case of water and Kleenexes.
Yeah.
It's so crazy, like, when you're crying a lot, like,
You get
you need to
dehydrated.
drink
Hmm.
and you need a lot of Kleenexes, and that was, like, the simplest gift. They, you know, just didn't even leave a card, in fact. They just left it on the porch, and that's it. But it was such a thoughtful, simple little thing
Hmm.
that we could absolutely use.
Absolutely. So, there's some strategies and some coping skills. But I've met a few people that would fall into the category of what's called complicated grief.
Mhm.
And complicated grief is kind of an interesting beast in and of itself. If losing a loved one is one of the most distressful and unfortunate common experiences we all face,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we're all gonna have this experience. None of us make it out of this life alive. People that experience normal grief and bereavement, they gradually have that pain, that part of sorrow, but then they gradually kind of come out of it and they start kind of feeling that the emotions are kind of easing a little bit. And it's
Mhm.
possible for them to accept the fact that it's happened and that it's time to move forward and keep them in their hearts. For some people, though, those feelings are so debilitating, and they don't improve after the passage of time. And it's a really complicated emotion that grief starts to kind of like
Yeah.
set into place.
Yeah.
And this could be like having a really difficult time accepting the fact that there's a loss, allowing yourself to experience the pain of the loss because you're afraid of how deep it's going to hurt. Um, you know, Having other relationships be put on hold because there's such a void left there. And
Mhm.
when this starts to happen, what we see is that people start to withdraw. They start to, really kind of pitch tent into that depression side.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for them. This sorrow is so intense that they can feel it tangibly within their body too.
Yeah.
The
Oh,
body keeps score, as you know, right? And
yeah,
so it
physically.
stores in there.
Mhm.
And so they can really not focus on anything else but the loved one's passing, and it can, turn into every little thing that would remind them of them. It's hard to like let go of items or tokens or
Yeah.
like things because that's a connection to them.
Mhm.
And there's this sense of guilt that if I let this person go, if I really accept this, then well, who am I? Does that
I'm
show that
forgetting them, or
exactly?
it shows that I don't love them, and or just the concept of, if I put this even in a box, I don't want to forget them. Now
Yeah.
that they're not here every day, I want their memory and I want their memory alive. And I think that's oftentimes when I've had friends who've lost loved ones or children, that's the thing that they've shared is they want to talk about their loved one.
Hmm.
They want to share their name. So even just telling your friend, "Hey, tell me one of the things you love the most about so and so." Like, they want to talk about them.
Yeah.
And so because that's a way that they can keep their memory alive.
Yeah. And the person that suffers this complicated grief, they get bitter about the loss, right? And
Mhm.
anyone that tries to comfort them is pulling them away from the time to mourn, which
Yeah.
isn't healthy, right? And it's hard because they start to like lose trust in you because you don't understand.
Yeah.
And they have a really hard time enjoying life. And I'm telling you, it can create problems in carrying out normal routines. Work can suffer, school can suffer,
Yeah.
right? Like all these kind of functionality things that we need to like maintain a lifestyle, they start to suffer. And chances are, and there's times where you start questioning your own existence,
Yeah.
and that can be pretty scary.
The pain is so deep. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, the causes of what's the difference between complicated grief and we'll say mainstream normal grief
Mhm.
isn't really known. It
Mhm.
really has to do, I think, with the emotional temperance of the person that's experiencing it. You know, if you are someone that comes from a background of scarcity where the relationships have kind of always been on the rocks, or maybe, family systems have been divorced and
Mhm.
there hasn't been a lot of stability, chances are that that complicated grief is going to be something you might have to deal with because
Yeah.
once you attach to someone and you feel like there's a connection there
Yeah.
and you lose that through overdose or through suicide, it's really hard for you to kind of like say, can I love someone with the possibility of this happening again?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's a protection. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, this also happens with, like, not just so much in addiction recovery, but even like the loss of a child. I see a lot of people that have children that are born with disabilities and whatnot. And it's a hard thing because these are real emotions.
Yeah.
As a therapist, one of the hardest things I deal with is grief because the goal is to get them to the acceptance part and to feel the magnitude of the love that they had. Because I say this all the time, it only hurts because you love so deeply.
Yeah.
If you didn't, if you didn't love, like you wouldn't care.
Yeah.
But we look
That's
at
a good
that as,
point.
can anything like flow back in there? What do you
Mhm.
think about that though? When you have a loss, that you feel or you believe that I don't dare do this again because
Mhm.
this hurts so bad. Why in the world would I sacrifice my emotions to do this again when everyone seems to leave me?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a protection because oftentimes, even though love is such an amazing feeling, the pain of loss is that polar opposite that is, like you said, it even affects you physically, that it's just almost too much to bear.
Mhm.
And so, why would you open yourself up to that again? Because the chance of loss, it's guaranteed realistically, whether it's somebody moving away or whatever. Like, we don't stay connected always and forever. And so oftentimes people just find it's just safer
Mhm.
not to have it. But that's what life is about, is relationships. And that's what, to be able to have the love and to be able to have those amazing highs, we have to be open to those lows too. And that's part of what makes life so amazing. But yeah, it is absolutely scary and difficult.
Absolutely. And so, I've also noticed that with complex, complicated grief, we look at the backgrounds. Typically, a person that's experiencing this has some traumatic childhood experiences, and maybe life has been kind of unstable. And again, if there's been abuse or neglect or
Yeah.
abandonment
Or
issues,
just other family, like mental illness, it's going to make it more difficult. Yeah.
absolutely, it's going to be hard again for someone to, really feel like they are supported because of the scarcity that's kind of inflicted with the loss. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And so you look at the depression that kicks in, you look at the suicidal thoughts and the behaviors, the sleep disturbances, all this stuff weighs down on you. And when you stop physically feeling good because emotionally you're feeling down, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's
Mhm.
typically where we end up in relapse and consumption of alcohol, substance abuse, those avoidance techniques because we want the pain to be gone. People that experience grief while in the midst of their addiction also have a really hard time understanding the complexities of some of these emotions because they're numb to it. And there's a lot of times when you'll see a significant increase in substance use when this happens because now they really feel the magnitude of the loss, and when they
Yeah.
come out and they're starting to kind of come down and those feelings creep in, because your tolerance is so high, that emotion feels 10 times as bad.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And that's a hard thing. So what do you do with it? What do we do with grief, with complicated grief? What do we do? Well, the first thing is you've got to start talking about it,
Yeah.
right? You've got to start talking about the who, what, whens, and whys, and insides and outs. You've got to really
Mhm.
start disclosing everything that you're thinking, even if you feel as though it doesn't make any sense or holds zero value.
That always reminds me of, when you talk about it's our resistance to what is that's causing the most suffering. And
Yes.
oftentimes it's our resistance to feeling the grief, the sadness, the pain, the depression that holds us there and intensifies that.
Hmm.
I remember, I mean, I had all of our children using lots of drugs and epidurals and stuff. But I remember here a friend of mine who was a midwife talking about Lamaze and some of the breathing techniques that people do that want to use unmedicated childbirth. And part of that is learning to feel the pain, because they said when your body, when you try to like maybe hold on because you feel a contraction coming and you're like, oh, I don't want to feel this pain, it makes that contraction works. It makes the pain worse.
Mm,
But if you can hold your breath, relax, and let the pain go through you,
yeah.
then it goes through you and it passes on, and you can have some peace on the other side when that stops. And I think it's the same way with grief. It's the same with other emotions. If we try to resist the feelings that come with love or sadness or whatever, because we want to just hold on to it and not let it be worse, or we just think it's too intense, it makes it even more intense and it makes it even more difficult to handle
Hmm.
and deal with.
Absolutely. And so, you're spot on with that. And I think on accompanying with talking about it is you've got to find your tribe. You got to get the support. You got to get the team behind you, which typically doesn't happen because most of us try to push away and run from these experiences and we want to be alone, right? We don't
Yeah.
want to surround ourselves with people because they might leave too. But I'm telling you, if you try to do this alone, you're going to be sorry because you won't get the support that you need, but plain and simple,
Yeah.
right? And this is a hard thing too, because the last thing most people want to do is surround themselves with people because everyone else's life moves on, right?
Yeah.
And if you're the Debbie Downer in the corner, you're going to feel like you don't belong. But people, when you have a friend or a relative or a family member, loved one that loses someone
Hmm.
that needs that, step up and just be, even if it takes months, years, just be the team that they need. You know what I'm saying? Like
Absolutely.
like do the fellowshipping, do the outreach, let them talk about it. And sometimes people get worn out with this stuff.
Hmm.
And it's a sad thing because, if you've got one friend that you just kind of emotionally dump on, chances are they're going to get burned out. So you need to surround yourself with lots of people. There's bereavement groups, there's
Yeah.
grief groups, there's counseling and therapy that you need to get into as well. But then you've got to start surrounding yourself with the normalities of life again.
Yeah.
And that's hard,
So
you
hard.
know.
Yeah.
And I would also say that one of the neatest things that I've noticed is that you have to move.
Yeah.
You cannot sit still. I'm going to preach it till the day I die. Movement equals healing. You have to move. And when you can do it with a message or you can do it with
Purpose.
purpose, you're going to find that it is so much easier to now represent and to support and to proxy that person
Hmm.
than you ever would if you were sitting, at home,
Yeah.
with your door shut, with your kids knocking on the door, mom,
And I think that's
come
how
eat.
we allow some of that grief to work through us,
Hmm.
is because that movement helps those feelings and emotions move through us too. Whether it's, it doesn't need to be you're going out and running a marathon or hiking, sometimes it's even just writing a letter, writing in your journal, getting some of that out. It's just doing something. It doesn't have to be a big physical activity, but do something,
Hmm.
and something that relates to you, relates to them, to be able to work through it.
Yeah. And these kind of things, this is, I mean, no plug for the proxy run, but that's why we started the proxy run. We usually just do a run for recovery, and that was great. But then we started noticing that, like, we're having a lot of people that are coming here during the opiate epidemic, and we're noticing a lot of people that were here last year aren't this year. And we switched it to make it more of a remembrance run, a proxy run, so that you can put yourself back in their shoes and carry them
Mhm.
with you.
Whether it's somebody who's passed on or someone who's still struggling, or on the other end, just celebrating those in recovery, because we have everybody.
And I've noticed when people cross that threshold and they'll invite us into their lives. We've met families. God, I'm gonna get emotional. We've met families that have gathered together at the starting line of this race,
Mhm.
and when they finished, they didn't leave, and they invited us in, and we got to know about their loved ones and
Yeah.
whatnot. And this is part of the healing process. Is collectively, let's all take a little bit of that grief and carry it with you as well.
Yeah.
It's not going to make it all better, but it's going to lighten your load into the point where you can start moving a little bit more free, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Right.
yeah, 100%.
And so, and I'll never forget the fact when we had our very first 5K and there was a gentleman that was kind of meandering around right before we started. And it was what, 2012. And he was, doing this very first real recovery run we were doing.
Mhm.
And he came up to me at the very end and wanted to get his packet and told me that he was nervous about running this because he lost his daughter to an overdose, and
Mhm.
he didn't know how the people here would accept him. And that broke my heart because here's this guy that's in this grief
Yeah.
alone.
And too afraid to share, to talk about it. I know so many parents who are unwilling, mostly I know some that were unwilling for many years, but to share even how their loved one passed,
Mhm.
because of everyone will think I'm a bad parent. I don't want them to think that my child was a bad person. And, society, like, blames people that, oh, if you struggle with addiction, you're a bad person. And they don't want their memory to be tainted either by that. So they try to keep it hidden. And what does that do? It just
Mhm.
closes them off to other people because they don't dare talk about it.
Most men out there, if you're listening to this, guys, you're going to experience what's called distorted grief or delayed grief, right? Delayed grief is kind of like you having the experience, but needing to be stoic about it.
Mhm.
So what do? Well, you push it down,
Yeah.
right? You push it down, and
Or trying to help
yep,
others so that you just put your own emotions on the back burner.
absolutely. And it can be stuff down there for years, right?
Mhm.
But the body keeps score, and eventually it's going to come out, right? And it's going to come out in ways that you might not realize. I remember reading this years ago, and it kind of blew me away. It was talking about men who die of heart attack. When you start peeling back the layers on an emotional level, how much grief and sorrow and
Yeah.
sadness they carry,
Have often plagued them. Yeah.
because that's typically where all the cortisol and
Mhm.
all those good things inside our body, that's where stress goes to live, and that's where it hangs out. And so if it's working on your heart for years and years and years,
Yeah.
one of these days you're going to have that heart attack. And it is the wildest thing, right? I mean, start looking at that. So delayed grief should be very, I think, I don't know, it should be talked about a lot more, guys.
Yeah.
And it's us guys that typically do this because we're trying to be the stoic ones. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't come out when it's time, it'll come out, when you don't want it.
Yeah.
Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?
And then oftentimes you don't even know where it's coming from or why because it's just your body kind of explodes.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. There's also this sense of like a secondary loss, which I think is kind of an interesting thing. And secondary loss is grief that can occur when the loss affects like several areas of your life. And so it would be things like you lose your husband, who's also the provider. So not only did you lost your husband, but now you lose your
Income.
income, and you might lose your home. And so as you're trying to grieve for this situation, you're also now very aware that life's going to change dramatically,
Yeah.
you know. And so the secondary loss can delay the principal side of grief because
Mhm.
there's some urgency set there. And that is a lot harder to rebound from because you have to be able to have the common, food, water,
Yeah.
shelter, you know,
Yeah.
to take care of yourself. And that's
And
why service is so important.
yeah, I think that probably also plays into like some certain relationships. Oftentimes, when there's a loss and people are going through some of that bargaining and denial and blaming, then, then they want to blame this certain friend or family.
Yeah.
And then you lose that whole relationship with that side of the family or those friends or family because you want to, blame it somewhere there. And instead of being able to utilize that support group,
Yeah.
you've now have another loss of other relationships.
You're right. I've worked with several people that have had a spouse pass away from an overdose,
Mm,
and they lose that side of their family.
mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Whether it be, because that side of the family's upset, or just because you don't feel comfortable, or maybe because it's
yeah,
just time, but you lose
yeah,
that support system.
yeah,
So that's a secondary grief. Does that make sense?
yeah,
It's a
for
secondary
sure,
loss.
for sure.
And so these are things that, you may not really even realize or understand until it's happening. That's why it's important to discuss this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
This is traumatic grief is intense, and traumatic grief typically happens with people that are in addictions and they have these overdoses and these kind of things because you have the trauma, but then you also have the loss. So which comes first? Which do you deal with first, the trauma or the loss, right?
Yeah,
And that's where that complicated grief can come into
yeah,
play.
for sure. If there's a car accident or something, and then you have the trauma of, yeah, the accident
Hmm.
plus the loss of the loved one. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's also something called masked grief, and this is kind of interesting. Masked grief can present in physical symptoms or behaviors that impact your life, right? The
Mhm.
functionality of what you're doing. And usually it's not recognized until other things start going wrong. And that's usually where the physical stuff starts to happen, right? That's where you start to have the high blood pressure, you're having the sleeping problems, you're having
Yeah.
the eating problems, right? And the massive grief you can kind of count away as, well, I'm just not sleeping enough because I'm busy or whatnot.
Mhm.
You got to be real with yourself and get in tune so that you can follow the process, because
Find
it's
out where it's really coming from.
going to
Yeah.
come. Collective grief has happened to Team Addict Athlete numerous times. And
Mhm.
collective grief happens when a tragedy occurs within a community or large group. This has been challenging for this team,
Yeah.
right? Because we've had several athletes that meant the world to us.
Mhm.
And when they've passed away, it's left a void,
Yeah.
right? And there are such delicate approaches to this. We've had some families that have been open arms and some that have been very closed. Um, it's one of the hardest things collectively when a loss occurs. It's like this collectively when we found out Robin Williams passed away, right?
Mhm.
Everyone kind of felt like not him,
Yeah.
right? It's one of these things where we all kind of experience it the same thing on a smaller scale, yet with the same magnitude. As you look at someone that's influential, whether it be a boss or like a leader of a group or a member of your church, whatever, you're gonna feel that, and everyone collectively kind of goes through it. And that's actually a little, dare we say, better because everyone kind of has that same feeling. But there's always those that you know have a little bit harder time dealing with it and
Well,
accepting
and
it.
that's it, is everyone grieves differently. And so some people that want to just, share about them and shout from the rooftops, and other people are like, no, I want to grieve in private and I want
Hmm.
to grieve quietly. And um, then they're offended or they're hurt by the way the other person's grieving, either way. And then there's some resentment or anger or frustration, even within parents and families. I've seen that happen with friends of ours where husbands and wives, are grieving separately, and that causes a rife, right there in that family where the child is gone, and now how do we grieve together but differently?
Yeah. The ones I think we need to pay most attention to are the absent grief type sufferers. And absent grief means that you aren't showing the typical signs of grief, and maybe you're acting as though you haven't really even experienced it and it's all okay. But it can take a turn and kind of fall into that landscape of denial, right?
Mhm,
And I'll be honest with you, this is something that I've been a little bit worried about with myself, specifically with the passing of my mom last year. It's been a year now,
mhm.
and
Barely.
I still haven't felt the magnitude of it, if that makes sense. And it's not that I'm cold or callous, it's just that, and I don't know, is that normal? Is that not normal? Is it normal?
Yeah,
Is it normal not to have any grief? I mean,
yeah.
I went through like wow, this is heavy,
Mhm,
but it wasn't like anything that you would expect. Maybe I hear people that say, "Oh, like they post and they have these long posts about their parents that
mhm,
passed," and I'm like, "Wow, I mean, significant grief when your mom passed away just because of the love that was there."
mhm.
And I almost feel like, am I doing something wrong because I don't feel the magnitude of what a
The
mother's
loss.
passing should be on me?
Well, I think we've discussed it before that oftentimes you went through some of that grief years ago
That's true.
as your relationship changed and you guys kind of went your separate ways, that you grieved a lot of that loss while she was still alive,
That's very true.
you know?
Yeah, that is actually very true, and that did come while she was still here, yet as though she was absent,
Mhm.
and so, there are some interesting, I don't know, caveats to a lot of this. But remember, if you don't deal with it, it's going to come out in a lot of physical things. You're going to have headaches. You're going to have, like breathing, kind of shallow breathing and problems. You're going to get some chest
Mhm.
pain. You might get some loss of appetite and fatigue, and the body has a funny way of reacting to this stuff when we don't let it out. That's why movement is so important. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
for sure.
You got to burn those calories of grief out of your system.
Yeah.
And I'm saying you can't just go.
Getting that cortisol out. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm not saying you just go for a run and it's all going to be better, but it's gonna help,
Yeah.
right? It's
Release
gonna
some of
help.
the pressure, like when you're opening a can of soda that's been
Hmm.
thrown around in the car. If
And
you don't do it quick.
and the cool thing we're doing with Team Active Athlete is I'm noticing, and we're doing some stuff. And we want to get some collegiate type eyes on this is utilizing trauma therapy, EMDR therapy with running and movement. And we've been doing some stuff here at home base with it, and it's doing pretty neat. And so
Mhm.
this is how our bodies are designed to process this stuff. We're not
Yeah.
designed to just take a knee, stay put, and just experience. We're supposed to, pick up, carry on, and remember and promote, right? And
Yeah.
and that's what I think is the best, healthiest way to do this. But to each their own. Everyone's going
Yeah.
to be
And
different.
everyone's going to have setbacks, and that you're going to have good times and bad times, and that's okay. There's
Hmm.
not a wrong way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, as I've been dealing with a little bit of this in the private practice, I wanted to share with you guys just some thoughts and some ideas. And I know it's one of these things that we're all going to experience in one way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
But it doesn't have to be the end of your experience. It doesn't have to mean that you won't be able to love and to be loved.
Yeah.
and to share, something that's coming up next, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that sometimes when we get people that have a hard time, identifying their emotions, um, I'd be more proud of you if we could do, what do you say, thoughts. What are you thinking about? What thoughts are creating the feelings that are creating the turmoil,
Some of that
right?
emotion. Yeah.
Because a lot of times we overthink this stuff, right?
Hmm.
We think of the should-haves, the could-haves, the would-haves, and that creates feelings of disappointment and loss and grief. And,
Hmm. Yeah.
so check your thinking too. If your thoughts are not in order, your feelings are going to follow no matter what.
Well, and some of it's just the self-awareness of being able to identify what is my thinking and what is
Hmm.
my thinking that's comes down to then the feelings and, are they valid? Are they real? And what can I do about it rather than just being stuck in it? Assess yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, listeners, I hope this helps a little bit. And I hope it kind of sheds some light on, maybe some ideas or thoughts. If you've got someone that's struggling, if you yourself are hurting, there are pathways to healing. We love to, help you out if you need it. Jump on the website. If you need some referrals, if you need to check in, please, Coach Blue here's therapist, mental health counselor. Like we
Yeah.
can help guide you in that direction. But please, if you're experiencing any kind of stuff that we've talked about today, jump on and jump into the proxy run this September. You'll
Yeah.
you'll feel the difference. It's a team support, right?
Yep. Everyone come.
And yeah, we'd love to have you share this with anyone. This live broadcast will then turn into a podcast that will be released, I think, tomorrow. And so, if you want to re-listen to it, if you came in late or something, or you want to share this with someone, please do so. All of the podcasting platforms, shoot, you can find it, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
we're on
everywhere.
everywhere. And if you need any additional help, jump online. You'll find our contact information there. Blue at addicttoathlete.org, Marissa at addicttoathlete.org, addicttoathlete.org in and of itself.
Yeah.
Right. So until next time, do your best and turn your mess into that powerful message.
Thank you.